Amen. All right. So we're going to dive into Mark chapter 4 here in a moment. But if I could please have two volunteers. There's two other passages that we're going to read tonight, and I'm going to require you to read. But I need you to keep your one finger at Mark chapter 4. And if you are willing to volunteer, maybe I could just have who can volunteer here for me. Maybe just kind of unmute. All right, Tom. So Tom, if I can have you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. Okay, so you need to stay in Mark 4 because we're going to park off there. But once we get to 1 Corinthians 10, 13, then you could just read that one for us. All right. And then I had some hands up. Abby, your guys' side, I know who it is. Is you. All right. So Abby, if you can go to Psalm 107. And when we get there, I'm going to ask you to read from verse 23. Okay, so those are the two volunteers for it. But here's what we're starting tonight. Is we're starting a little series entitled "Same" or "Same." And I know, as a church region in Johannesburg here at the moment, we've sort of been speaking about building authentic spiritual community and what that looks like, because that's what we want to be as a campus ministry, but every ministry in the church is we want to be an authentic spiritual community. So we're gonna sort of expound on that theme, but with our own twist, in kind of our own campus way. So, and often I think how this word is used is somebody would say, "Man, I'm going through a hard time." Maybe like one of the sisters shared, like, "I'm in the desert. I feel like I'm being stretched by God." And there's not like a long sentence that comes after that. If you feel like I'm going through the same thing, you just say, "Same." All right. Or, "Man, having an incredible day, like knocking it out of the park, learning tons from God," whatever it might be. And again, it's not like there's a long sentence. If you agree with that, you just say, "Same." So it's sort of the statement that really captures, in essence, that we're in this together. We are journeying together. Okay. And that's what we're going to be unpacking over the next couple of weeks in midweeks and potentially in smaller groups as well. So that brings us to Mark chapter 4 as we launch our theme here, and we'll pick it up from verse 1. We'll read verse 1 and 2 together. It says, "Again, Jesus began to teach by the lake. The crowd that gathered around him was so large that he got into a boat and sat in it out on the lake, while all the people were along the shore at the water's edge. He taught them many things by parables, and in his teaching, he said," and then he kind of transitions into some things. So this sets the scene where we have Jesus. He's out by the lake with some of his disciples, and it says that a crowd gathered around him. This crowd was so large that somehow, he thought it best to get into a boat and to literally sit on the boat and teach this crowd from the boat. So you can imagine like this crowd, standing at the water's edge with Jesus a little distance away from it, sitting on the boat and teaching. All right. And where we're about to pick up is on the bookend, right at the end of this day, and verse 35. All right. So let's go there. It says, "That day when evening came," so we at the end of the day, "he said to his disciples, 'Let's go over to the other side.' Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, 'Teacher, don't you care if we drown?' He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, 'Quiet, be still.' Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, 'Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?' They were terrified and asked each other, 'Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him.'" All right, many of us know the story well, but it says there in verse 35, as evening was approaching, so Jesus has just spent this day teaching a number of different parables. The parable of the sower was one of them, but a number of other ones as well. He's kind of preaching and teaching. And then as evening approached, he said to his disciples, "Let's go over to the other side, okay, of the lake, Sea of Galilee." And it says that they pretty much, left as, as Jesus was, as he was sitting in the boat. So it's not like they went to fetch something else, or they went to, do something else. Literally, as he was sitting on the boat, they started rowing to the other side of the lake. And then it describes how, as they were rowing, in verse 37, a furious squall, I think I'm pronouncing it right, came up, like a ferocious storm. All right. Now, interestingly, the Sea of Galilee is actually located in a depression of 200 meters below sea level, and it's surrounded by hills. So you can almost imagine it being in this valley. So what would happen is, if wind starts blowing and the temperature is right, it would actually give rise to like these ferocious, terrible, violent storms that can, it's almost like a nice day, and then all of a sudden, like, at the drop of a hat, things change. So that's exactly what's happening here. It was known for its suddenness and its ferocity in the storms. Now, all the disciples are together, they're in this boat, and they are freaking out. I mean, now it must have been a big storm, right? If you consider that most of these guys were experienced fishermen. So it's not like their first time on the lake. It's not their first time in a boat. And yet they were going crazy. And yet, we read, about Jesus. Must have been a very long day for him, because it says that he is sleeping on a cushion in the stern. Now I don't know, do you think Jesus would snore? All right, that's besides the point. All right, I don't know, but I don't know if you would or not, but he is like in a deep sleep. There's this crazy storm happening all around. The disciples are freaking out. And then they go and wake him up, and they accuse him. All right, they say, "Don't you care about us? Don't you care that we're about to drown?" Now, I don't know how that sounds to you. It has a question mark at the end, but that doesn't sound like a question mark to me. That sounds a little more like a statement. I don't know if your parents or one of your friends have asked a question that really wasn't a question. They are, they're actually making a point, a statement. So that's what's going on here. But what a massive accusation. Here's Jesus' disciples in the situation, and they accuse him of not having compassion or caring for them at all. All right, now let me ask you this. How do we typically respond? Because it definitely sounds like, as I listen to you guys, that there's some things going on in your life. I know there's some things going on, and there has been some things going on. But how do we typically respond when sort of storms come into our lives? When things don't go according to plan? Maybe you had a set idea that maybe for the disciples, they were just going to row gingerly, over the lake, get to the other side, and boom, they're going to carry on their way, but it didn't turn out that way. How would you say do we typically respond? What is kind of like a variety of responses that you would say you have when those things happen in your life? That's an actual question, so you guys can unmute and answer.
Go ahead, Sandy.
No. It's Women's Week this week, so you can go.
Hey man, love that. So I think for myself personally, I think I run away. So when something bad happens, or something frustrating, or there's a conflict or anything, I want to be an ostrich and like put my head in the sand and ignore it. So if that means a lot of schoolwork is happening, I'll procrastinate until I have to face it. Or there's a conflict, I'll avoid the person. I won't care. I'll be like I'll just not do anything. Because for some reason, I think if I ignore it, it'll go away. That's like logic, clearly. But yeah, that's me.
Yes. Go ahead, Zander.
I think for my temperament, I like taking control. So I hate putting things actually in front of God, because it's like, I'm not sure if things are going to go my way. So as soon as things start going badly, I'm like, okay, how can I try and steer this boat into the way that where I want it to go? So I think, that's kind of my temperament. So it's kind of really hard to be, it's almost like it takes a lot of courage for me to give up and put it in front of God. So yeah, I think that's me.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that. All right. Anybody else? Same.
I'd like to add, I don't know. You can go. Okay, sorry.
Go for it, Amy, or Chanel. Yeah, go Chanel, and then we'll have Amy.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add to Zander. I think I do that a lot. I think in my brain, I'm like, I'll definitely tell Abigail about this problem in my life. But first, let me figure it out. And then I'll tell her what I did. And then I'm like, okay. So I think my first reaction is to be like very self-reliant, very like, okay, I wanna fix this. Like nobody else can help me, not even God. So yeah, same, Zander, same.
Come on. All right, Amy.
Okay, so I think last year and before that, like in the past, I used to be similar to Zander, where I'd want to take control to the point where I'd like cut off like everything else in my life, and just my sole focus would be like solving that problem. And that actually would affect me really, like it compromised me physically, emotionally, because I'd almost burn out. But I think with this year, I also had a few little like bumps on the way with like things that I didn't expect to happen that are sort of out of my control. And I've tried to turn to God, which has really helped me. I've got like a little book with like Psalms and Proverbs where you go off your emotions and it gives you scriptures for what you're feeling and stuff. And I've definitely been using that like a lot more. And I feel like it's a much better coping mechanism when you have a problem. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, let me add this question. I appreciate everybody sharing. What would you say when storms come our way? And look, you know, they come in different intensities, right? This was kind of a ferocious one that broke out for the disciples. Sometimes they're not that ferocious. Other times they are. What accusations do we typically make against God in those times? Where do we go if we are like, let's just drop the filter here for a moment. Like what are some accusations that come to mind? And sometimes we might even say them when those storms roll around. Obviously for the disciples, it was like, do you not care? Like, what do we do? What are some accusations that you guys make when these storms come?
I think a very common one is just kind of like, are you even there? Right? It's like, do you like, I mean, I think it's pretty similar just to what the disciples said, like, do you care? But I think it's pretty, I guess, deluded, because then we kind of assume that God's only purpose in our life is to stop bad things from happening, which is not true. But still, we're very human and truly emotional. And I think when bad things happen, we just really think that, like, I mean, we take control, or we shove our head in the sand, and then we can't really see that people are there and that God is there. And then we're just kind of like, where you at?
Yeah. Amen. Thanks, Dana. All right, Riku.
Yeah, I think like for me, it's not really like accusing God or directly saying that, but I think there's an underlying level of almost entitledness towards like what God, like he has the ability, and therefore because he loves me, he's supposed to help me. So it's almost like things go bad and I just got to ask him. It's like putting in my request and like assuming it's supposed to happen. And almost assuming I know best and God has to, you know, clap his hands going with my plan.
Okay.
So I think, yeah, remove, and that's very, like I said, it's not, I don't think I go directly at that, but I don't think that heart beneath it is not sort of a trusting God no matter what type of heart. So yeah.
Amen. All right, last one there, SJ.
So I also think mine is similar to Ricky's in the sense that I don't think it's like an accusation, and maybe more of like an accusatory feeling. I think it's just like a feeling of like severe doubt, you know, like why are you still letting this happen, kind of thing, you know, like surely you got to step in. I don't feel like I can go on further, kind of thing. So this these accusatory like doubtful questions, I guess. That makes sense.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's kind of this little snapshot narrative that exposes so much about our humanity, because we are the disciples in the boat, man. Sometimes I look at them in judgment, but I am them. But yeah, I think sometimes we rush to conclusions when it comes to storms, when stuff comes up or when things don't go according to our plan. And again, don't just think about like radical things. Think about even, small disappointments. I think sometimes I can think like this is divine discipline, that somehow God's unhappy with me. That's why he's bringing a storm. He's trying to teach me a lesson, or he's trying to test me. Or now that could be true. All right, we have an example of that in the Bible where Jonah, God gives him a specific request, and Jonah decides instead of being obedient, he ran away, and God literally sent a storm to catch his attention and to turn him around. So that can happen. All right. But interestingly, here in this situation, it's not that necessarily anything bad had happened. This storm actually came because the disciples were obedient to Jesus, which is interesting. Jesus was the one that said, let's go to the other side of the lake. Okay, so and they said, sure. I mean, if that's what you want to do, let's go. So on the way of being obedient and being faithful to Jesus' request, the storm comes up. All right, so I think we just got to be careful that we don't rush to conclusions that a storm means something. We don't necessarily know. And I think, my kind of catchphrase that's come up, from our time with Kit Cummings, and hey, if you're joining tonight, we kind of had a series on prayer by this guy called Kit Cummings. It was really a great time. But one of the things that he mentions is we don't know if it's a blessing or a curse. Like we don't know yet. We might in hindsight. So I think we just got to be careful before we rush to conclusions. Now, before we return to the story, let me just say this. One of Satan's biggest tactics is to somehow make you feel in the midst of the storm that you are unique. Okay, now, sometimes we're like, I want to be unique. I want to be a special case, all right? But that's like one of Satan's biggest things. Like if he can get you to feel like you are totally alone, like nobody's going to understand, nobody has the same struggle, nobody's going through the same things. If he can get you to feel that, if he can get you to feel a sense of isolation, he has you exactly where he wants you, because then he can do with you whatever he wants. It's just a big tactic. I mean, I felt that, right? After I became a disciple, I grew up religiously and sort of made the decision to be a disciple, actual follower of Jesus in my second year at university at UCT. And it was great. Got baptized. Like, man, I was zealous. I was dreaming for God. I felt completely like disillusioned with everything else in my life. All I wanted to do was study the Bible with people and help other people become disciples. And previously to becoming a disciple, I really battled with impurity in my life. And then for a period of about 6 or 7 years, there was nothing. Like I was totally gone. And then just as I was about to go into the full-time ministry, that resurfaced through some choices that I made, but also just like a number of things going on. And I remember just sort of thinking to myself, like, I don't think anybody, I mean, how can I do this? Like 6, 7 years in, like disciples of Jesus are not supposed to do this, especially people that go into the full-time ministry. Like, man, if people actually know this, like, what are they going to say? And that's exactly where Satan wanted me. And he kept me there. For a while, I allowed him. I've felt this when different insecurities have come up through my life. I don't know if you've ever, have you ever like really blown it? Like when you did something and you just, like you really blew it and there's like no reason for it. I remember we went to a soccer tournament in Port Elizabeth. Now, this is a church soccer tournament. Let me add that. So, disciples, we're all playing, and one of the churches decided that they're going to stack their team with good soccer players that weren't necessarily spiritual. So they were, and these guys weren't necessarily disciples. So we arrived at the soccer tournament. Now, I'm not a soccer player. You can ask Mike Masola. Like when we went away a couple of weeks ago and we played action soccer, I'm like a bull in a china shop. All right. Like I'm kicking your legs. Your shins are hurting, like it's bad, all right? But what I do have is I'm all heart. Like I'll run you down the whole night. So in any case, what happens with this one team is we play against them, and man, they're just aggressive, like slide tackling us from the back and doing this, doing that. So much so that one of the guys that's on our team got slit tackle or tackled from behind and he broke his arm. So I thought, sure, this is not good. And then the very next game, there was kind of an incident where this happened again. Somebody kicked my shin. And you know that moment when you see complete red, like Jesus has left you, you've taken him off, he's beside you, and you are now your old self, and you're about to give full vent to all of the anger that's inside of you. Now, the problem is, literally right next to the field is lined up with disciples that are cheering us on. There's church leaders standing there. And I literally am going over to this other soccer player. We're about to go to blows. Here I am, the campus and singles ministry leader that came with the soccer team from Cape Town, and we had to be separated. And somebody had to sit me down and cool me down. I was just like, you know that feeling afterwards when all of a sudden your senses come back and you like look around you and you realize where you are, but it's too late. It's like, oh my goodness. You know, that often happens with us. Like these storms come in, sometimes because of your own doing, sometimes because of other people's doing. And then Satan's biggest ploy is that you're unique. Like, how can you do that? Like, you know, no one else would do something like that. You totally on your own. All right. And what we start doing is we feel sorry for ourselves, start making all these kind of accusations against God or assumptions about God, why you would allow this. And we start believing that. And because we isolated, there's no one in our life to challenge those thoughts. We're not allowing anybody else in. So we start believing these different things, all of our conclusions, and that drives us even deeper to isolation. And sometimes we won't necessarily completely isolate ourselves, but you know how it goes where you arrive at a certain campus event and you've just pulled your heart back. Like you're there, but you're not really there. Like you are actually among us, but totally isolated, totally on your own, totally guarded, you know, because of these things. I just want to, this is where Tom comes in. Tom, if you can read for us 1 Corinthians 10:13, I think we need to recapture a conviction about this. Go for it, Tom.
The temptations in your life are no different from what others experience, and God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you're tempted, he will show you a way out that you can endure.
All right. Yeah, this is one of those verses I think we need to memorize. That it says, man, no temptation has seized you except what is common to man. Like a group like this, it's the same thing, and that God is faithful. He won't allow you to be tempted beyond what you can bear. Now, interestingly here, the Greek word for temptation can also mean testing or being tested. Okay, so don't just think about a sin context, also think about a storm context. That it would read that no testing has overtaken you except what is common to man. And God is faithful that when you are tested through a certain storm or whatever is going on, that he's already determined that you can bear this. And as you get tested or the testing, he will also provide a way out from under it. So you can kind of supplement those two, whether it's a temptation and a certain struggle that you're wrestling with, or whether it's a storm that you're going through, the same thing. So really, in essence, man, it's same struggle, right? Same storms. And we are all in the same boat as these disciples were. But the great thing is that we serve the same God. All right, now when we go back to the story, we pick up here in verse 39. So these guys are freaking out. They're accusing Jesus. Don't you care? Verse 39 says he got up. He rebuked the wind. Can you just picture that for a moment? Imagine I go over to Max's house and I see her outside and she is with full conviction rebuking the wind. Like, man, you know, I'm going to go to her parents and go, you know, has she eaten today? Is she all right? Like, how's she holding up? Like, but he literally rebukes the wind. He says to the waves, quiet, be still. Then it has this radical sentence. Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. Like, that's just crazy. And at the end, they respond as we would in verse 41. It says they were terrified. Like, they standing here going, did he just speak to the wind and the wind listened to him? Did he just command the waves, like literally spoke to the waves and the waves obeyed him? And they asked the question that all of us would ask, who is this? Who is this man? That even the wind and the waves obey him. Now, what I love about this, and Abby, I'm going to come to you now, is what that shows to me is that, you know, these disciples followed Jesus, even though they didn't know everything about him. They're still asking, who is this man? Like, there's still a component of Jesus that they're so blown away with that they're like, how? We didn't consider. And remember, these guys have seen miracles. They've seen miracles. They've seen him teach. I mean, all of that stuff has gone on. And yet they still followed him, even though they didn't understand everything. And I want to say to you tonight, I don't know where you're at, but maybe you jumped on this call and maybe one of your prayers for 2021 was to somehow, I don't know, take your relationship with God seriously. I know I did that when I went to university. I don't know, maybe you're on the call tonight and you've been actually diving into your Bible. You just picked it up yourself and decided, I'm gonna read it more. Or you've been involved in Bible studies with some other people. But there's a reluctance to be all in for whatever reason. I want to tell you this, that those guys didn't have it all figured out. They had some things figured out, but you don't have to follow Jesus only when you understand the whole thing. Like, that's not required. What is required, though, is faith and deciding that I'm going to trust him, that however this thing unfolds, like, I'll just keep following him. And I'm gonna grow in my knowledge and understanding as we go. So don't wait. Just jump in, join us as we follow him. But you know, the question that they had is, you know, who is this man that the wind and the waves obey him? Now, interestingly, the Old Testament actually answers that question about who has the authority to command the wind and the waves. So Abby, if you can read there for us, Psalm 107, verse 23 down to 30.
Okay. Some went out on the sea in ships. They were merchants on the mighty waters. They saw the works of the Lord, his wonderful deeds in the deep. For he spoke and stirred up a tempest that lifted high the waves. They mounted up to the heavens and went down to the depths. In their peril, their courage melted away. They reeled and staggered like drunkards. They were at their wits' end. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out from their distress. He stilled the storms to a whisper. The waves of the sea were hushed. They were glad when it grew calm, and he guided them to the desired heaven.
Okay. All right. So in essence, what's happening here? This is at a deeper level, but when Jesus, you know, sort of commanded the winds and the waves, he was making a statement about who he was. That in a very real way, God's rule and reign was breaking into earth. That in a very real way, in the person of Jesus, he was the good creator God that is able to speak to the wind and to the waves. Like, that's why these guys are grappling with it. They somehow, that penny has somehow not dropped, or it hasn't dropped this hard. But you know, that's what's going on. And then we'll close out here in verse 40. If we back it up, obviously Jesus rebukes it, everything goes calm. And then he said to his disciples, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? All right. Now let me ask you, and again, you can answer, what do you notice about Jesus' response here? And what do you think about it? Like, if you're on the boat that day, how would that have hit you? What do you think about how he interacts with the disciples on that day? What does that teach you about him? Let's have some responses on that one.
Can I go?
Go for it, Mike, and then we'll have Willem after you.
For me, it shows that he's surprised at our lack of faith, like really surprised at it, because by now he expected the disciples and also us to a large extent to actually believe in him, because he's done everything already. And yet for some reason we still doubt him. And I imagine for the life of him, he doesn't understand why that is the case. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. Willem?
I just think. Sorry, I just think that it's kind of weird how he says no faith, not like little faith. It's like you still have no faith. So that's just like an interesting way of him saying it. I don't know.
No, it's true. I haven't even seen that. I think it's a great observation. Yeah. All right. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think something interesting is that because prior to this, the disciples asked a question like, "Don't you care that we drown?" And Jesus doesn't try and defend himself. Like, he's not like, "Of course I care. Of course I love you. Of course, whatever." Like, he calmed the storms. He did that. And then he asks them a question, and it's much more hard-hitting than theirs. It's much more deep. And yeah, I think Amy wrote it in the chat, but if I were there, I would feel ashamed. I would immediately feel like literally that moment where all my senses come back and I'm not afraid anymore. And I'm like, oh, why did I do this? Why did I doubt this? Yeah. And so I think it's scary and it's a hard question, but I think this question is still true today. Like we can ask this to ourselves like daily. We're like, why am I still afraid? Do I have no faith? Like Jesus literally did so many things. But yeah, it's interesting because prior to this, they've already seen miracles and now they have to see miracles and they will keep seeing miracles and keep doubting, which is kind of comforting because they were with Jesus and so they doubted. So I guess I'm allowed to doubt. But yeah, Jesus requires faith from us. So it's challenging and comforting, I guess. But yeah.
Sure. Those are some great observations. Yeah, I see Amy, wrote just kind of feeling ashamed. Like you'd feel probably exposed, like, oh my goodness, like my true self have come out in the storm. And now all of a sudden, like Abby said, now I'm back to my senses. I'm like, ooh, that I just asked Jesus if he cares. Oh my goodness. I don't know. You'd be like, where can I hide? Like, but yeah, sometimes it is that way. All right. Any other thoughts before we close out here on that? What do you notice? Okay. Well, let me bring it in for landing here. What's interesting is Jesus didn't just stop with calming of the elements. Because the greatest danger was not the wind or the waves to these disciples. It was actually unbelief in their hearts. The greatest threat was not the storm. The greatest threat was not the outside circumstances of what's going on. Right? And I think that the thing is, like, our greatest problems are from within. It's not around us. And I think this is why Jesus, I don't know if I'd call it a gentle rebuke, but maybe a gentle rebuke. He called them out and he said, man, do you still lack faith? Because they heard him teach the word and they've seen him perform miracles, and yet they still had no faith. It was their unbelief that caused their fear. And their fear is what made them question whether Jesus really cared. It is their fear that set them on a path to really question the nature of God. And, if we don't help one another to stop, like, you can follow down that route and that's going to lead you to a conclusion that maybe God doesn't care. Maybe he doesn't even exist. Maybe, like Dana said, where is he in the midst of all of this? But often that's more a reflection of ourselves and our own response to the things that we're going through than the God that we serve. So I want to say we have the same struggle and same storms. We're in the same boat, all of us. I'm with you. But we serve the same God. Literally the same God that in Psalm 107 said that he would bring down the storms to a whisper, and he would lead them to kind of this incredible harbor place. But I think we have to shift our perspective and maybe expectation that we don't necessarily pray that hard for the storms to go away, but maybe for us to develop the kind of faith through them that is required in order to trust God deeper. So, I'm going to ask a question and give you the answer. Do you think that Jesus knew that the storm was coming when he asked the guys, let's go to the other side of the lake? Absolutely. Isn't that interesting? Like, he's the dude that said, let's go to the other side of the lake. He knows that there's a ferocious squall that's going to come up. And if you consider and stop for a moment, what are some good that came out of the storm? And I think that's the question that I want us to ask. What are some good that can potentially come out of the storms that we have, the struggles that we have? But I want you to know definitively that you're not alone. That's same, man. Same for you, same for me. We're in this together and we're going to figure this out. So hopefully that's been helpful. Hopefully that's been insightful. But that's kind of the start to our little series here. And we'll keep unpacking this in the next number of weeks. Amen.